Hey guys, welcome back. So this video is going to be sticking with the same theme as my previous video, where I show how I'm using the 3D printed everything machine to make something. Our private Discord has really started to take off, and backers have begun creating and sharing their own attachments and conversions for the machine. So I've been thinking of ideas for maybe some giveaways, and while I was capping a piece of ruby the other day, I noticed how hard the material was, and I thought maybe it would make a really cool looking and potentially really sharp knife. So that's what I'm going to attempt to make in this video, a hobby knife with a ruby blade. Just after diamond, ruby is the second hardest naturally occurring mineral on Earth, and in theory, if done correctly, it should be able to be sharpened to an unthinkable, like atomic level of sharpness. Is a ruby blade practical? Probably not, but I imagine it'll look really cool and attain an unparalleled edge sharpness, and will, in theory, unless abused, it should hold its edge forever and never need to be sharpened again. So in preparation, I bought this beautiful chunk of lab-grown ruby, some crushed red opal that I plan on inlaying into the handle, some silver, some copper odds and ends. I'm going for like a vintage, maybe Asian-inspired look for this knife, so I'm going to try to randomly fuse silver into the surface of the copper to hopefully create like a textured or reticulated effect, something similar to Kimbu. So the first step was to attach the wet saw attachment to the everything machine, and attempt to cut a thin slab of ruby as a blank to shape the blade from. And it worked, but in hindsight, I think I should have maybe stacked two blades with a washer in between them, which I've done before, so I know the spindle and motor can handle it. This makes cutting thin, even slices much easier, and it comes in handy for making things like doublets, but for whatever reason, I didn't think of doing it that way. I just did it the hard way, but it worked out anyway. Then I attached the flat lap attachment so I could quickly smooth both sides of the slab to a uniform thickness. Now that I have a flat blank to work with, I can trace the blade shape that I want to cut. Here I'm using my everything multi-tool that I'll be launching a Kickstarter for in about a week or two. In my opinion, it's the most versatile and interesting multi-tool ever made, so if you're interested in checking it out, I'll be attaching a landing page in the video description. Back to the wet saw attachment to trim it up, and after a few cuts, we now have the blade cut roughly to the shape I'm looking for. Next, I used the flat lap attachment for final shaping. I added a few facets and a light polish, but I'll be adding final facets and polishing in the sharpening stage. I just wanted a rough idea what it's going to look like. I took a break from the machine for a second to measure out a piece of copper that I'm going to shape into what eventually is going to be the holder for the blade. This might be the only step of the entire project that's not done on the everything machine. After grinding off the base with a diamond wheel and shaping an angle at the top, I decided to try a silver reticulation technique, which was difficult because the flux on the copper blackened with heat, and it was impossible to see what was going on. But after it was pickled, I could see it worked. Here I'm drilling a hole in the bottom for attaching and then soldering it to a brass post. Here I'm attaching a Dremel collet to the end of an M5 brass rod. If the ruby blade ends up as sharp as I hope, I think attaching the blade this way will come in handy for an additional use. I'm going to use this 8mm copper tube for the handle. I find that I use the everything machine chuck not only as a rotary tool, but the ER16 collet also comes in handy as a positionable vise for holding round stock of all sizes. Next, I needed to make an end cap that's going to hold the chuck. Rather than cut and drill the shape I needed from copper, I just ordered some washers in the exact dimensions I needed. For stuff like this, AliExpress is the best. You can design and build almost anything from that site. I bet you could build a nuclear reactor with nothing but AliExpress off-the-shelf parts. Add a couple M5 threaded inserts and some solder, and it's time to set up the everything machine like a lathe. I was going to set up the full lathe attachment with chuck and tailstock, but I figured since this piece is so light, and the look I'm going for is sort of a handmade and antique look, something you'd see in Tomb Raider or the old Chinese man shop in Gremlins, I figured it didn't need perfect precision, so I could get away with lathing the stock directly in the ER collet. First, I added a couple of these copper bushings. These are going to be used as a border for the opal inlay. They were soldered in place, and then I started fusing random pieces of copper all over the tube in an attempt to create like a silver-copper reticulated effect. The copper needed to be heated to just below its melting point for this to work, and I had serious concerns with the heat traveling to the magnets in the spindle motor and destroying it. The collet was way too hot to touch, but it was fine. I pushed the everything machine to its limits on a daily basis, and it's honestly shocking what this thing's been through. Water, fire, abrasive powders, dropping it. It's still running just fine. This is still the original motor, but since it only costs like 20 bucks to replace it, and it's so easy to swap it out if I do destroy it, I can do stuff like this without much worry. After cleaning in some pickle, it was time to add the inlay. Heating the copper to near melting point warped the tube a bit, so I was worried it wouldn't spin true, but I bent it back into shape the best I could. Since I'm going for an antique look anyway, I really wasn't that concerned. Here I'm using the micromotor handpiece on the everything machine with a grinding burr to shape and contour the copper bushings. When I ordered these bushings, I thought they were solid copper, but apparently they're manufactured with some sort of sintered metal process and were coated with some sort of polymer, so they burst into flames for a few seconds when I started soldering them, but after the coating burned off, they were fine. Inlaying the opal is a pretty straightforward process. You're going to use CA glue to adhere the stones into the recess, but there's a couple critical details that if not followed exactly, you'll destroy the effect. The first is not laying too thick a layer of CA glue. You want to stack layer upon layer of glue instead of just filling the void in one shot. The second is the glue that you want to use a quality brand of CA glue with a short expiration date. Something like Starbond. CA glue absorbs moisture over time, and if your glue is old, it'll turn white and cloudy when curing. Third is you want to use a curing activator to force the glue into cure quickly before it can absorb moisture in the air. Now we're going to grind down the opal flush with the base. And this is where the versatility of the everything machine really starts to shine. Because it's modular and adaptable, you can quickly rearrange the parts into custom configurations. For example, here I'm adding the wet saw water tank and attaching the flat lap water supply to the adjustable tool holder on top of the machine. And now I can grind down the opal in the lathe with a running water supply. And it only took 2 seconds to reconfigure the machine into the perfect setup for this particular operation. With the help of the micromotor attachment and the sanding disc, I was able to level the material flush in just a couple minutes. Then it was just a matter of bringing the opal to a polish. At this point, the only step left is to fabricate a brass knob for tightening the collet. I already had an M5 knob, but it was too big, so I took off 2 millimeters in the lathe, I polished it up, and this project is done. Only thing left now is to assemble it. The reason I added the knob and collet was because I thought if it could get as sharp as I think it can, it would be a cool feature to be able to loosen the knob so that the blade can rotate while it's cutting, or tighten it if you want a fixed blade. I 3D printed a stand for it and gave it the same faux wood effect I showed you guys in my previous video. This is supposed to have a vintage look, so I threw it in a bag of darkening patina, and this is the final product. I think it definitely looks like it came from the Mogwai store in Gremlins.
I cannot sell him at any price.
But the goal here is for it to be the sharpest knife in the world. So I'm going to have to 3D print the sharpening jig and figure out the best way to measure sharpness. That'll be coming in a future video. I didn't even try to put an edge on it, and I noticed that it's already pretty sharp. So I'm actually really anxious to see how sharp I can get it. You guys who have donated to the Everything Machine project have been amazing. And so I'm going to be giving this to someone in the Discord, and I have some other giveaways planned in the future. As always, if you'd like to build your own 3D printed everything machine, you can get all the current and future files, build tutorial, parts list, and access to our private Discord for a minimum one-time donation of $10. The Discord is really starting to pick up, and now backers have started creating their own attachments and sharing them there. So I think this project is really going to start taking on a life of its own. I'm going to be launching a Kickstarter for an unrelated project in a week or two, which is an incredibly time-consuming and expensive endeavor, and I wouldn't have been able to do it without your support. So I just wanted to thank everyone who's donated so far. Speaking of my Kickstarter, I'll be attaching a landing page in the description in case anyone would like to be notified when it launches. Other than that, I think that'll do it for this video. As always, thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.